Disinformation basically denies people the right to the right information. This gender disinformation is basically targeted to deny women their sort of right to political activism and political candidacy. Print media, the legacy media, is suffering to a certain extent because of this, because people do not trust the print media as much as they used to do before. It won't necessarily be news, it's just gossip most of the time. So we take that and convert that into news. We are there to provide information, not sensationalism. That I think a gossip channel or something can do. So we need to do our job and do it correctly. Is also the person using social media to put out that, so they need to act more responsibly. And the platform owners, I think they have their guidelines.
Hello and welcome to the next edition of Her Puls, a program series that looks at things that matter to women. It is presented by She Digital, Sri Lanka's only dedicated YouTube platform by women, for women. Today we're going to discuss what is the role of media as well as social media at a time of elections. To discuss, we have Hana Ibrahim, a senior journalist and editor, who is currently the editor of the Daily Express and the Weekend Express, to speak to us. She's also the convener of the Free Media Movement. Welcome, Hana, to the show. It's really good to have you today.
Thank you, Dilakshi, for having me, and looking forward to this show.
So to get started, we all know that news now breaks on social media. Mm-hmm. And then it reaches our newsrooms, the traditional newsrooms. And unlike before, now the mainstream is amplifying the content that is filtering through social media, and we get caught up in this whole rush of having to beat deadlines. And what we do is usually present unverified media content in the public domain, and we also don't have the skill set to deal with that sort of information. And especially because it's election time, this is bound to happen. There would be more of disinformation, propaganda, and hateful narratives. And surprisingly, legacy media might be amplifying that. How do you deal with this problem?
I think journalists as a whole need to do their jobs, because if you the difference between social media and real journalism is that you do not produce facts, information without verifying them. But when you sort of put yourself in competition with social media, and we come to a situation where now we are following what social media comes out with, without sort of creating our own stories, without doing what we really need to do, verify our facts, get the real information, and then not put out the information without having all the facts in hand. So I think it's not just the journalists, it's also the newsrooms, the editors, all are responsible for ensuring that we maintain our credibility, because once you sort of carry information that is not verified, that's sometimes blatantly false, that's so sensational, you lose credibility at the end. And I think print media, the legacy media, is suffering to a certain extent because of this, because people do not trust the print media as much as they used to do before. Because we are sort of have a tendency to follow social media. But there are exceptional cases as well where social media kind of waits until the print media break the story. I think one of the examples was there was this suicide case, and they were waiting for verified information. But overall, generally, media, I think we've sort of regressed to a point where I can't call it progress, I can't call it. So it's really regressed to a point where we are sort of waiting to see what happens on social media to take our story forward. And that's not how it should be. We are the people who should be breaking the news, and we should be in a position where we can do it with credibility, with authority, with authenticity, and we need to take that back. As journalists, that's our duty.
So you said that we have to be breaking news,
yeah.
But the news is being broken in so many different ways and splintered into smithereens. So who is going to break news, whether it is going to be legacy media or social media? And from what we see, it is social media that is breaking most of the news. And integrity of the information is becoming such an important part. And the media industry is also not trusted by the people. There is a huge trust deficit because of this.
Definitely.
So what can we do in a traditional newsroom to make sure that content still has integrity? What are the benchmarks?
Stick to basics. Like I said earlier, you have information. Your first task is to verify that, right? Do the fact checking that's needed. Don't leave the fact checking to another person. Do it yourself, because you and I, as young journalists, the thing that we were taught was like, you have some information, you go and discuss with your editor, and he says, go get the facts, talk to the people who are actually involved in this, then verify it from 2 or 3 other sources, and then come back to me with the real information. I get the feeling that's not happening. We need to bring that kind of conversation between the journalist and the editors back into focus. And we need to give journalists a sense of pride in what they're doing and ensure that ethical standards are maintained. Because we need to, because our profession, our credibility rests on that. And the difference between legacy media and social media is the fact that we have a code of ethics to abide by. You have guidelines to abide by, whereas social media basically has the parameters set by the platforms. So that's a big difference. So social media is also basically citizen journalists who call themselves journalists, coming out with whatever information they see and putting it out as news. So it won't necessarily be news, it's just gossip most of the time. So we take that and convert that into news. So that's the major fault is ours. So we need to be very careful about that.
So you mentioned the code of conduct and the guidelines that newsrooms can be using. But when we started in newsrooms, things were very different. Now there is technology complicating matters, and it's making things look good. Some of the processes have improved, and technology is your friend and foe at the same time. So what can the newsrooms, legacy newsrooms, do to deal with disinformation? Because it requires new skills and understanding technology. So how do we treat that problem?
I think you're talking about new tools. So it need to be used to our advantage. With those tools, it's very easy for us to verify facts. It's very easy, we can use them to verify the authenticity of photographs that we sometimes take from online. News that is appearing even on social media, use that to fact check.
Okay, so you think the newsrooms should be having fact checkers as storytellers? Now some of the experiments include that fact checkers are becoming storytellers because you have to be able to use those digital tools. Are we suggesting that the newsrooms should be adapting technology in a way, in a better way? And is it possible? To the extent that all newsrooms across Sri Lanka, we have some idea as to how we're going to use technology to deal with disinformation.
Yeah, I'm not talking about having a separate fact check section or the other. I think journalists by sense should be trained to do their fact checking. It's because
you mean basic skills have
to be there, and your stories. We're not talking about stories that are out there that belong to somebody, but fact check your stories. So use those tools, and in that context, I think they need to be given training on how to do it. And I think they have been given training, but it has to be sort of continuous and on-the-job fact check training. That can be done. It's not that it cannot be done. And you can have fact check units which sort of checks stories that are originating elsewhere. And then you can sort of either debunk or approve it and say this is it. But when you are writing your own story, I think journalists need to, in the self-interest, in the interest of maintaining credibility, you need to do your fact-checking.
So you also spoke about social media, and social media is a highly unregulated sector. So people can publish anything and everything if they want. Not to say that the legacy media is also very responsible at all times. We're not. So what can the social media do? I mean, can we hold them accountable to some, to some code? Can we demand some basics from social media, especially during election time? Because sometimes there is also the possibility of impacting electoral outcomes and impacting electoral integrity in a country and entire processes. So what can the social media be doing to be more responsible in the sharing of information? Because they are unregulated.
I think the onus is also the person using social media to put out that, so they need to act more responsibly. And the platform owners, I think they have their guidelines, they have their structures. So if they can sort of implement them rather than sort of implementing them in the abstract and sort of, be more proactive, I think that can be managed, but it's very difficult for the print media to issue guidelines and a code of ethics for social media because we're dealing in two different things. Though if you're talking about journalism on digital media, that's a different matter altogether because the professionalism and code of ethics, wherever it is, should remain the same. But when it comes to social media, we're talking about people expressing their views, expressing their opinions. So I think people themselves need to take responsibility for what they put out there, rather than get somebody from outside to come and impose regulations. Because if you're talking about governments imposing regulation, we're looking at something like the Online Safety Act, and that is not something. That's not somewhere we want to go. So, in order to safeguard that, prevent that from happening, I think we need to take responsibility for how you use social media. Not just the people who put something there, but also those who share it, who sort of amplify it, basically. Because social media will give you all the tools you need to amplify whatever you're putting there. Because the algorithms will sort of, search for whatever you're using. So it makes it easy for you to sort of make it loud, go viral, do all those things. But then you need to be responsible as citizens, because what you do today is impacting somebody else. So keep that in mind when you put something out there. It's not just about yourself.
So election time also means that a lot of disinformation, hate narratives, dangerous speech, and also a lot of propaganda. So there is a mix out there, and there is artificial intelligence on top of that. So you have a lot of doctored deep fakes, so we do not know oftentimes how to deal with that. But one of the issues that we also see is how gendered disinformation gets. Have you seen a lot of gender disinformation these days, and are there any examples that you can speak of?
Quite a lot. In Sri Lanka, there's in India, there is, take US, for instance. So if you take Sri Lanka, if you look at the gendered disinformation coming out about our Prime Minister, from her status, single status, to whatever she says, it's been sort of, things have been taken out of context. And recently, I think there's a viral video going around with one of the candidates, apparently something she said about a certain community, which has been taken out of context and made it into a different video, and that's going around. This is impacting voting because it sort of colors how people sort of look at issues. So disinformation basically denies people the right to the right information. And you're talking about examples. If you take US as an example, Kamala Harris, from the day she was Biden decided to step down and nominate Kamala Harris as the presidential candidate, there have been so much of disinformation about her, from her black origins to her sexuality to, there was even a story going around that she was involved in Snoop Diddy part, and she was an escort to somebody. So if you look at the amount of misinformation, and it's impacting people because it's targeting not the voters of that specific segment. It's targeting the voters who are undecided and who sort of might change their minds and vote for that particular person. So when you come out with this kind of information, and if you do not have the wherewithal to verify these things, it's easy to believe these things. So it's always designed and targeted to change people's minds.
So what you say is that women are getting sexualized, objectified, vilified, stereotyped. And how would this impact women candidates we will be electing members to our next parliament?
I think,
does it reduce the women's space and the opportunities to be successful?
It does, because if you sort of take the overall scene, it also discourages many from coming into the political arena, exercising the political right to sort of contest and be politically active. And at the other extreme, and it also, like, if you're a young girl watching this and you have political aspirations, what's the message that gives you? That I can't go there because the same thing is going to happen to me. And also, people who are already, the energy you have to use to fight this can be better used to project yourself and talk about issues that really matter to women. So that it denies the women, the candidates, the opportunity to do that, whereas they are having to defend this. So I think ideally political parties should have some kind of guidelines on how to, the women candidates should be trained on how to handle these things. They should be facilitated to, things need to be more proactive rather than react to something that happens. So I think a lot of things can be done, but overall this gender disinformation is basically targeted to deny women their sort of right to political activism and political candidacy. So that's an issue, not just in Sri Lanka, but all over the world. I think women who enter politics face this kind of situations.
Hannah, you're also the convener of the Free Media Movement. So I want to ask you, are there any best practices that we can learn from? Are there media institutions that are handling political disinformation, gender disinformation, hate narratives and propaganda better? How can we move forward? Because the Election Commission has issued guidelines for the mainstream media and is also saying that it is applicable to social media. Where do we find the guidelines? How do we conduct ourselves better in a way that our conduct as journalists does not impact electoral integrity or its outcomes?
Yeah, as Free Media Movement, we about I think 2 months ago we did this training program on how to identify and debunk misinformation, fake news and disinformation. And then we got about 35 journalists from newsrooms, and we got them to come up with stories and get them published, and we had fairly good response. But the problem is, beyond those stories, what's happening, it's very difficult to tell. So best practices, you don't need to go looking for best practices. The guidelines are there for you to sort of implement the best practices. It is follow the ethical guidelines, do the right thing, do your job as a journalist, because it's just not to publish any news that's out there. So it's also we also have the responsibility of educating the people on what's happening, keeping the people informed, providing them with the right information. So we need to take ourselves more seriously, I guess, in this content, and ensure that we do not unnecessarily sensationalize information, because we are there to provide information, not sensationalism. That I think a gossip channel or something can do. So we need to do our job and do it correctly. And where guidelines are concerned, there's guidelines, Election Commission issues guidelines for print and broadcast media, and at the same time they tell it can be expanded to social media as well. It's not that easy, because the guidelines are very specific for print and broadcast media. It talks about, opinion on print cannot be sort of taken into broadcast, and when you're sort of reading headlines, you cannot put your opinion there. But then how do you extend that to social media? Because it doesn't come under any regulations. It's an own entity, and people just live from wherever. So I think little more thought has to be given to how social media can also be brought into this, so that everyone can be more responsible and act more responsibly.
Be more responsible and act more responsibly. That's the message from Hannah Ibrahim, our guest today, on her Pulse. It's about the role of journalists, role of the media industry, and how we may contribute to electoral integrity and to ensure that our elections are not sullied by journalism of a bad kind. Thank you very much, Hannah, for joining us today.
Thank you.